We're going to start in 5 minutes. Okay, so it is 7:05, so we are going to start. Again, the purpose of this, I guess, series is to create a safe space to talk about what's going on in relation to the movement, to help educate and inform. So for this series or this episode, we're going to be talking about inequality and racism in academia. It's not always an easy conversation, especially in places that we think that we have the freedom to talk freely. And we have a few guests, but I'm gonna let Slam say some words.
Oh yeah. This topic is very important. When you look at the racial war that is happening in America right now, you can see how it's been fueled by the media. It's been fueled by those in political power that have a platform to say whatever they want. But mostly it's been fueled by past education. And one of my favorite quotes is by James Baldwin. He said, "The paradox of education is precisely this, that as one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine the society in which he is being educated." If you look at our, I guess, K through 12 education, there is an unequal emphasis on the Holocaust than there is the Native American genocide, which was one of the most successful attempts at genocide our world's ever seen. And when you think about that, why would America emphasize the Holocaust more than a genocide that happened on its own land? It would be to shift the focus away from a monster that's even worse than Hitler in my eyes. Even when you look at Thanksgiving, Thanksgiving was originally a celebration created by the Governor Winthrop of Massachusetts Bay Colony when his soldiers came home safely from a massacre of 900 unarmed women and children of the Pequot tribe. And that is a celebration that we're still celebrating today. No one has any idea. We've been taught to believe that white is right and black is wrong. We've been taught to believe that white people have done all the discoveries. They have uh, done all the inventions, that they are the most profound thinkers in philosophy and science. And that is not the case. So this topic is very important, trying to dispel the racism that is unconsciously a part of everyone's mind if you've been educated in America. So as of right now, we like to have everyone introduce themselves for tonight's conversation.
So first, we're going to have Mr. Lawson. He is a professor at the University of Hawaii in the law realm. I'm going to bring him on so that he can properly introduce himself. So, okay.
Hey, what's going on? So, thank you both for having me on here. I teach law here at the William S. Richardson School of Law, University of Hawaii. I practiced law for 18 years prior to moving here to Hawaii about 13 years ago. And I teach in the area of criminal law, civil rights law, evidence. And when I used to practice, I practiced in the area of criminal law and civil rights.
Thank you. Okay.
All right.
Is that it?
What else you want to know? Um, I think this is an important topic. I think right now, especially in academia, it's easy for us to sit back and say, okay, the issue is police and Black Lives Matter. But I think what we've been seeing throughout this latest round of protests is systemic racism and how it's infected all of our institutions, from the National Football League to NASCAR, and the universities are no exception. In fact, I think it's the ground. It is where, right, a lot of people graduate from and continue to engage in systemic racism. So if you look at that, there has to be something that we need to change. We can't sit back and say we want our systematic racism to be dismantled. We want to start a new way of living in the United States and not focus on education and not focus on universities and what we've been teaching that has contributed in a large part to what we're trying to dismantle.
Thank you.
Is that enough?
More than enough. Next, I'm going to have Rachel Killam. I worked with her at the Office of Career Services at the University of Tampa while I was a student there. Oh, that sounds weird to say. So I'm going to bring on Rachel.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad whoever is out there, I'm glad you all could be part of this tonight. And I always like to send greetings to the world of COVID-topia that we're all living in, and hopefully everybody's surviving okay. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Career Exploration in the Office of Career Services at the University of Tampa. So I've been here at UT for 5 years, and then I worked for 7 years in Career Services at the University of Colorado Boulder. And I work, Career Services is part of the Student Affairs Division of Higher Education. I'm only mentioning that because I think that Alex and Dr. Lawson, or Dr. Harris and Dr. Lawson are going to be speaking from the faculty instructor side of things, and I'll be talking from the other side of the house. So I just wanted to mention that really quick. Before I was in higher education, and I'm sharing this part for a reason too, is I was a pastor for 5 years. So I got a BA, my Bachelor of Arts is in Biblical Studies from an evangelical Christian liberal arts university, Colorado Christian University near Denver, and worked with middle school and high school students as their pastor. And then I went on to work with young adults, so 18 to 30-year-olds, doing preaching, teaching, theology, counseling, all that stuff that goes into being a pastor. And then I went to seminary during that time because I was starting to evolve away from being a pastor and got my Master of Arts in Counseling. So I'm a trained mental health counselor. But it was during that time, it's actually a lot like Slam said earlier, through my own education, and my own experience as a female pastor in a space where there weren't a lot of us, and there were people out there saying that I did not have a right to be there. You don't have a right to speak in these places. And not everybody was like that, but that opened my eyes to systemic patriarchy, sexism. I started learning more about classism and racism as I went along the way, but that education opened my eyes and my own experiences. And I'm not saying that my experience is anything near similar to like the daily lived experience of a Black person in our country, but I think that I can relate on some small level around that identity piece being questioned constantly. So I share that piece as well. I've evolved away from that too. I always say it's many Rachels ago. And the last thing I wanted to share, which kind of brings me to this table tonight as well, is like I said, I've been in higher ed for 12 years and I'm growing professionally as well. And I'm going to start a doctoral program in the fall at University of South Florida in interdisciplinary education, because I want to look at 3 key areas. That's higher education administration, so the systems and structures that make up higher education. And I want to look at industrial and organizational psychology, the systems and structures that make up businesses, which are very similar to that in higher ed in some ways. And then I want to look at compassionate leadership, and I want to see how those 3 things intersect. And what I hope to do through my process is, again, be a part of what has already been mentioned here, which is revising, expanding, dismantling the systems that we're in to be much more inclusive of the fullness of our humanity. And I'm doing that through the lens of compassion, because compassion is an ability to recognize the suffering of others and then to alleviate and do something about that suffering. So that's kind of what brings me to this as well. And I told Kavihi earlier, continue to learn a lot about my own whiteness and my own part in the system, and how I can continue to question and challenge that. So, nutshell.
Thank you. Okay, and finally, I'm going to bring on Dr. Harris. He was a guest speaker at one of my classes at UT, but he is involved with a lot of different things, and I'm going to bring him on to properly introduce himself. So here we are. It's loading. Start video. There we go.
Hello. How are you? There you go. Thank you. It is, I'm in my car, as you can see. I'm doing a lot of things. but definitely keeping safe while out. So everyone, please, take precaution. I want to encourage you with that. Also, I'm in Tampa, Florida, and I did get a chance to speak at UT. And one of the things that this is a very important topic, as I was on another forum last night with my brothers, and we had this discussion as well. It's so much, and I think it's very important to put the topic of racism or even the protests that we see in context and understand this is an outcry of a pain that we have experienced as people and as a country and in our institutions. I think we have to look very much at the social construct around the idea of race, which never which is no one was, it wasn't a such thing as being born white or black. All those labels were embedded into a social construct for superiority and inferiority. One group becomes superior to the other groups, and it has all to do with power and to ensure that that power is not shared. And if I can keep one group and treat one group less than human, then I can maintain my wealth, I can maintain my family construct, I can maintain the power as it relates to policies and so on and so forth. And I think uh, when when we start to really dig deep and address the problem and not so much the symptoms, we will see the eradication of such things that we have seen plague our institutions in academia, right? As well as in other institutions as well, both in the private and public sectors. And so I think having a conversation tonight around the ism of race in academia is very important. And I think it's very important to look at the board of directors. It's very important to look at the other administrations and really see where we have intentionally worked to really be more inclusive, understanding why HBCUs were even the historical Black colleges, for those who are not familiar with that acronym, why they were created, because the slave owners who had children by their slaves didn't want necessarily their kids to not be educated. So they start to help establish a separate institution to ensure that their children who were not quote unquote fully white were half black, half or biracial, some people refer to it as now, um, get a higher education as well. So there were some slave owners, not all of them, but there were some slave owners to try and still play in both fields and say, okay, well, I will make sure that my child still gets educated. So I share that little bit of information to say that even hundreds of years ago, it's been in the institution and it continues to be embedded into the institutions today. The residue or the residual effect of those kinds of institutionalizations still play out today. And I think until we bring awareness to it, then we cannot rid ourselves of it. And therefore, conversations as this is very important. And just a little bit about I forgot that part. I'm the CEO of the Arts Conservatory for Teens. I founded that 8 years ago with my business partner Herbert Murphy, and we've served thousands of kids. Our focus has been education, empowerment, and enrichment, which is our mission to ensure that students one, graduating from high school with a diploma and not a certificate of completion, and enrolling into a higher educational institution or prepared for the workforce. And we've been successful with 100% high school graduation, 90% higher education enrollment, and the other 10% are going into the workforce in our preparedness track for that. And I'm in the music entertainment business, been in there for some time. So I travel and when it's not COVID and and stay active.
Thank you. So Just before we dive into everything, I just want to say that Dr. Harris is probably going to have to hop off a few minutes before we like conclude everything. And then with all the questions that we have, I know like we won't be able to get through them all because again, this is like a multi-layered topic. But with that being said, we're gonna dive in. Slam, did you want to read the first question? One moment.
I was muted.
Yeah,
Go ahead
good.
and ask the first question. I'll do the second.
Okay. Okay. So the first question that I have for you guys is, do you feel that academia is a safe haven for conversations about inequality, race, and racism, or does it seem that it's only safe for those who have tenure? And again, not everyone has to answer the questions, but if you like, you guys can just go for it.
I can definitely respond to that very quickly. I think that it is the institution itself has not been set up to create an environment where the students are comfortable to talk about, you know, any of the differences, whether it's especially related to racial inequalities and political to challenge political ideologies, etc. It seems to become, while it is an institution for higher thinking and engagement, it seems to carry the same thought around, oh, we can't talk about politics, we can't talk about religion. And we know that often happen in public settings where in the workplace. And so that tends to carry over also into the academic institutions. However, it is not necessarily stated that you can't talk about that here, at least not in the institutions that I've worked, unless but it's up to the professor. And I've been in classes when I was in school where some professors were very open in inviting to that discourse of forum and sharing of different ideas and difference of opinions and facts, etc. But more so than not, it is not a welcome, or it's not an institution that I feel that in general, the ones that I've been engaged with, that really welcome that kind of conversation. However, I have promoted it and really with some of the lectures I've given to really take to introduce a way of talking about issues that people either dance around or be evasive about, to say, as a person who is really challenging your intellectual development, we should really critique our own belief systems, our own practices, and really open ourselves and our thoughts to other ideas that in other theories, etc., around different topics that we generate. And that's how I've been able to introduce the concept of race, inequalities, and equities that we see in our world.
Oh, hold on, Mr. Lawson. You're not mute. You're. Oh. Oh, wait, hold on. Hold on. There we go. There we go.
All right. As you can see, I'm not too technically fluent, but I'll give you my perspective from a law professor's viewpoint. And I teach criminal law, like I said earlier, and civil rights and evidence. And so race has to come up, and it's the elephant in the room. But I think the universities have to be an institution where we openly discuss these things, and it's uncomfortable. Look what's going on now in our nation, right? You got some students who are in class who are afraid to say anything about race, because they may be ostracized. If you go to a conservative school, you're going to sit there and be quiet for the most part, because one, all you're trying to do a lot of students are just trying to get their grade and get up out of there. And then you get into a point where people are so closed-minded that it becomes, instead of an educational experience, it becomes an argument. And again, just look at if you're on social media right now through the Black Lives Matter protests and stuff like that, You just get the same yin yang, you know what I mean? The same back and forth. You guys aren't talking about black on black crime, right? You know, same kind of rhetoric. As a law professor, you know, even before I became tenured, um, you know, if you're trying to seek tenure as an academic, you're not going to be in faculty meetings raising holy hell. It just ain't gonna happen, you know, because you're trying to achieve your tenure. But once you get your tenure, there should be, you know, there's a freedom of expression. Um, and I think that becomes a responsibility on professors, whether you're tenured or not, right? The tenured professor should have to protect those that aren't tenured to speak their minds in faculty meetings. I mean, I've been to job talks. You know, job talks are where professors come to try to interview for a position, and they give a presentation to the students and to the faculty on a particular topic. And this one I went to a year or two ago, and this guy comes in here and he's applying for a position, and he has in his PowerPoint slides monkeys in suits. You know, and again, what I saw as a black man was something different than a lot of my white colleagues saw. And so, I pushed back on it. And to me, if you're not, if you're so tone deaf that you would come to a diverse school like ours at the University of Hawaii, right? We are considered the number one as far as diversity is concerned in law schools throughout the nation. And if you're so tone deaf, you would come here and put that stuff in your job talk. So, I don't know if I'm answering the question or not, Slam, but my whole point truly is this, is that we have to talk about it, right? We have to talk about it. And the second thing is teach the damn truth. See, when we talk about Slam, tearing down Confederate statues and stuff like that, now everybody upset. But the truth is, half them people that we have statues of is some criminals, murderers, and robbers and looters. I mean, Christopher Columbus was a thug, right? He was a thug, but we ain't teaching that. And so we perpetuate these lies in our institutions and pretending to be professors. We perpetuate these lies in our institutions, pretending that we're teaching our students the truth. And when we know the truth and still teach a lie, what does that make us? So no, you know what? As far as I'm concerned, the whole thing, we talk about the Black Lives Movement and all that, it ain't about, to me, it's just teach the damn truth. Teach the truth and let the chips fall where they may. Because, the truth has no boundaries. It has no boundary. It is what it is, right? It's good. All of us got good in us. All of us, and we got bad and good. I mean, Rachel, she said she was in Bible school. I'm not going to, you know what I mean? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, Rachel. You can't, it's good and bad in everybody. But teach the damn truth. We can handle that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that was good. I appreciate it. I think you started to kind of touch on what a lot of people are calling education reform, but it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly what that would look like. And with Mr. Harris working with high school students, I'd like to get your perspective on this. I worked in Chester High School outside of Philadelphia, and it's very, how do you say, overwhelming, maybe, I don't even have a good word for it, but to watch the students not have any motivation or any goal after high school, they just want to get through the day. And whereas they have the ability to go to college and they have the ability to, be smart and to learn, it's like they're not being pushed. They're just, put through the system and then they graduate and that's it for them. So I guess my question is for Mr. Harris, how would you go about motivating students so that they, I guess, want to go to college, or they want to be independent learners, or they learn to love knowledge so that we can one day help to deconstruct this systemic oppression? Because only through education, I feel like we can do that.
Yeah, I think that it's very important, one, to expose the students to all of the opportunities that exist. And I've always said it's one thing to expose and it's another thing to provide accessibility. One of the things when we talk about an educational system that needs to be reformed, I think we need to consider basically curriculum. And I've been advising some educators for their own classes on curriculum or their lesson plans. And I told the first, I encourage the teachers, we don't have to wait for a Washington or governors or senators or Congress people to pass a bill to reform the education. I think that should be in process. But I think at the ground level, I believe there are enough educators who believe like I believe, and we can integrate, as Kenneth was saying, into in the classroom, the truth, right, of the history of America. However, the unfortunate thing, many of our educators aren't as educated. Therefore, my advice has been to the educators to take some time and start to educate yourself on, in the words of Kenneth, learn the truth, so that it comes from an authentic place. We don't need a Black History Month. We don't need a Hispanic Month. We need to teach American history and have different segments. And because Africans who came to these soils that we now call America, they were equally contributors, maybe not equal, but probably in many ways more contributors in developing this land around it as we know it today. We know that it was populated with the indigenous or the natives that were here first. And because Christopher Columbus and they were search for gold and all that kind of stuff, and because of the lack of knowledge or being informed, thinking they were in India or some other place where quote unquote Indians, and so they called them Indians or Native Indians, and they're not Indian. They are natives of this land, and they were all different colors as far as skin tone and so on and so forth. And I think that once we understand there's so much information that hasn't been told. There's so much misinformation. People have been misinformed. So I think when students understand American history, there is an inspiration, there is an empowerment that happens, and that's the exposure that needs to happen. So there, hope. When you find a student that only thinks, and that not only just thinks, but that student has only experienced the lack of the inequities and inequalities that persist in the communities, it's very challenging for that child to provide hope. So what have we done? We've been able to expose these students to places that they generally would not have had accessibility to, so that we can start to provide the equity so that they can. And we use the arts. Some people use the sports, but we use the arts as a catalyst to do so. I have students who've gone on to become engineers. I have students who are listening to in the military, and some are on Broadway and various places throughout the country. We expose them to the world. We gave them a global, or as some people will refer to it as a noble global education.
I think that was a good answer.
Thank you. Rachel, I was wondering if you could expand on this, because I know Dr. Harris was talking about motivating high school students, but I know especially working in the Office of Career Services, you have to find out how to motivate college students who are going through everything and anything, and still trying to rein in their attention on focusing not only now, but a little bit towards the future.
There we go. I'll do my best to get to that. And if I'm not, rein me in. I wanted to, there was something that Dr. Harris said that sort of struck me that I thought I would share too, is like talking, like, and I think Slam touched on this too, and Dr. Lawson, really is through education is how we reform education. And I've been looking at it through and maybe this is kind of where I sit, is like wherever my sphere of influence is where I can have the most power in influencing this. So I'm not a faculty member, but I do meet with a lot of students. I do teach classes, and I do have a lot of contact and context with administrators. And so I think that for me, it's we talk about how we don't do a great job and we don't teach the truth in our classes, but I also, something I've noticed, again, in myself and in my context here at UT and my previous institution, is as staff members, we aren't practiced or fluent in having these conversations. So if we are supposed to take this to the classroom or in a meeting with a student in a career counseling session, how can I expect myself to do that when I can't have these conversations with my colleagues? And so something that's been interesting to me is, where are the spaces on our campuses for staff and faculty? Like, how is that built into the fabric of higher ed, where we're having these conversations so that we can, at least for me, and again, I think that's where I speak from my spot. So that's something I wanted to touch on too, is I've been thinking about and contemplating, how is this happening and what am I doing about these conversations where I sit in the university? Yeah.
I was just, I was going to say this, I think a lot of times, especially when we see, I've been involved in civil rights since I was in high school. When I practiced law, I did a lot of the cases in Cincinnati and Indiana and Kentucky where people were killed by the police, unarmed Black men, women, and children. I did a lot of civil rights lawsuits. So I've been involved in riots, I've been involved in protests, and I've been in the courtroom fighting the battles. And normally when something, when we see the George Floyd murder and what happened to Brother Aubrey in Georgia and Breonna Taylor in Louisville, and then you see the protests and stuff like that, there comes a period where everybody wants to talk about what it's like to be Black and have these conversations about race. And to me, they never get us anywhere. What I would suggest as far as university is concerned, teach all teach, I think Dr. Harris was touching on it, right? When we talk about teaching United States history, it has to be all the history, right? And so that white people are learning about Black folks and the true history, not as an elective, right? And again, it's because look, the Me Too movement has shown us over the last few years that most women know we may not be able to change how men treat us or how they think about us as far as in their sexist ways, but we do know that we can deter their actions when we start locking them up. We do know we can start deterring their actions when we start suing Fox and other, right, and NBC, et cetera, for sexual harassment. And that has brought the ability to curb those sexist behavior. And my point is this: we may not be able to change people's minds about how they see us as far as a race, and that's not what I think that we can do. What we can do though is teach you the true history of everybody's part in Native American, Indigenous people, Black people, all that stuff, and just teach the true history as we go through this, because all these conversations do is really end up in arguments or the confirmation bias. You see that with all this the Candace Owens and the rest of these so-called Negroes running around here really selling out their own race by putting and anyway and so again, man, and so all that does is just it creates that argument.
Right.
And when we sit down as in a classroom setting or in a school town hall setting, and we start talking about race, it's like we go in circles. What we need to do is teach the truth.
Right. And if I can just add to that, I think just to add to the point about, I think when you have these kinds of forums or you invite certain personalities who have strong opinions about that are polar opposite in many ways, miss the point. I think we have to go back to the problem and I've always used this analogy in conversations, especially recently. If I have a symptom of something and I go to the doctor, I want the doctor to not treat the symptoms. I want the doctor to find out what's this problem that keeps reoccurring. Obviously, it's nothing that can, what you've given me or what you've done, it has not gotten rid of the symptoms. So it has to be something much serious. And I think that when it is serious, we don't want to find out something serious that's going on with us, and the doctor and he she gives something that just kind of take care of it temporarily, and when a surgery needs to take place. So when there is a situation where a surgery needs to take place, regardless of how long it is, it's a life or death situation. You want to you want to get that surgery done, and you want to go to the specialist or the surgeon that knows what he or she is doing. Correct. So I think that's the same concept here. We have a problem. We've dealt with the symptoms. We must not continue to deal with the symptoms, or they're going to keep coming up. What we are hearing in the streets is an outcry of the pain that the problem has caused, and we will deal with it a little bit here. And because we haven't gotten into the systems, into the institutions, and the academic institution is one of the, I think, major players, because it is one of the things that in the structure, in the Reconstruction era and before the Reconstruction era, is always been to try and keep the African people from learning how to read. And because if they knew that knowledge is power, and when you can read and you can write and you can comprehend and all of those things that goes along with becoming an educated person, then it starts to equalize the playing field. You know how to then find information, and when you find information, they're starting to come up. So we see it in zonings, and people want to talk about defunding the police. They defunded education a long time ago in certain zones. So they had inadequate equipment. Therefore, you weren't, and they didn't have the same budgets. Therefore, you weren't getting teachers who who would want to go there, who are extremely qualified and provide quality curriculum to students. And so it's always been, if I can keep you from knowledge, if I can maintain that knowledge, then I can preserve a lot of the power. And if I can preserve the power, I can preserve my superiority. And if I preserve my superiority, then everyone else or other groups have to be inferior. And so until education is a major, and then sharing the wealth is part of it as well. And I think, but this is not a conversation of that, but sticking to the topic, I think we must encourage educators, and we can start from the ground up. We do not have to wait on an elected official to legislate how we handle our classrooms. We have to encourage our educators and colleagues to become more vocal and to teach these things. And there are different ways and creative ways you can integrate into your classrooms.
I wanted to say too, my comment on conversations was not about conversations about the Band-Aids. I was more like, we don't know how to have conversations about challenging the system. Like we had a division meeting a couple weeks ago, and one of it was actually our staff member who oversees like diversity and inclusion for our division. And she said, okay, in a group of like 50 of us, it was a great question. She said, so how are we seeing systemic racism on this campus? And it was like a mic drop, because it was a huge question. And that's where none of us knew what to say. And that's kind of more what I'm talking about, is just like y'all are saying, is that's kind of what I'm seeing too, is like, it's the same stuff over and over, the symptoms over and over. And y'all have said it well already. I'm interested in like, how do we have conversations that challenge the system? And it's interesting to think about when we talk about power.
No, I think that's an important point, because when you look at, I think Slam just talked or asked Dr. Harris about, high school students, but when you look at the way that we've been teaching in the United States since the last century, it hasn't changed, right? And so other nations change the way that they, the way that they have school from grade school on up. And I think really just creating a list of all the things that we believe in our institutions that contribute. And it's really everything that contributes to the systemic racism that we see. But the curriculums and how it's taught has to be changed, because what happens is by the time you get to the university level, everybody has, I mean, you see it throughout the nation. They have these beliefs of who General Lee is, and it's just not going to be shaken. They have a belief on last week when President Trump had his thing over in on sacred indigenous people's land, right? And they're out there, and the Trump supporters are telling the indigenous people, go back to where you came from. I mean, how ignorant can, right? But that is a product of this whole education system, to where you can sit here and try to explain to them why it is that and we're talking past one another, why it is that we want Confederate flags gone, why it is we want Confederate statues taken down, right? And we're talking past one another. Why is that? Because each of us is setting our beliefs. How did that happen? Based on our education, right? Based on all those beliefs taught from us coming all the way up. And that it has to change from the bottom, from kindergarten or whenever you start on up. Because by the time we get them here to university, shit, hey, I ain't changing nobody. I'm gonna educate you, but I can't change your mind.
Right, you're exactly correct, and I think that's one of the, I've been having some conversations with different educators. Unfortunately, this is going to have to be my last statement due to another engagement I have to be at pretty much on time as well. So I will say this just as my last statement, that it is very, very important, I believe, that we take the time to encourage our teachers, our friends, our neighbors, anyone who's connected to our principals. And people always ask, what can I do? I say, one, you have a school board. You must, as a community, become active in engaging your school board, your superintendent, your principals. You don't have to have a child to speak with these individuals, and encourage that for your community. Because the more we educate people, the less ignorant they are about all of these ignorances that's been passed down through generations. There will not be a discrepancy on whether or not you memorialize rapists and memorialize people who promoted greed in their policies and dehumanize other individuals. There would not be a question to memorialize such individuals. Yes, you should talk about them in history, but tell the truth uh, of what they were, and that's what they did. They were. If the whole thing was about slave trade, it was trading, it was greed and money, taking humans, not seeing them as humans. And so, unfortunately, for some, I mean, it was who it was, but they chose to do what they did, and it is what it is what it is in the history of this country. This was a bloody country, and they did a lot in the name of God, and so they took and they bootstrapped Christianity to sanction what they did as if it were correct and righteous thing to do, when it's not in alignment with anything that we know of God's grace and mercy, right? No mercy. But the reason why the mercy was only applied to those who were human, not those who are non-human. So if you are a person of quote unquote color, then you were less than they were. So when they talk about all men and women are created equal, they were not considering us, right? Who are people of quote unquote, again, of color. That was for them. Those guys, the founding fathers who attached the label of being quote unquote white, right, to it. So and I have to say that because this whole thing of white and black, as I aforementioned early, wasn't until later. So I just want to encourage you, what can you do? Be in touch, get involved in your local communities and your neighborhoods, and talk to your teachers and principals and superintendents and school board members. Know who you're voting for on the school board. Know who you're um, know to, know who you're voting for in the city council and the county commissioners, because that's where you get the communal support of the legislative area or the elected officials to help support in policies, and that's going to help. But we don't need policies for teachers to really start teaching this in their class. So thank you so much, and I wish I could stay to the duration of the next 10-15 minutes, but I must go. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question we want to get into, and we kind of already talked about it, but I have a little bit I want to say about it. is the duty of students and universities. And one of the problems that I have, at least with, I went to St. Joseph's University, and I feel like a lot of the closed-minded peers that I had never were corrected. And now they're going out into the world, and these are going to be our new teachers, our new businessmen, our new scientists. They're going to be the people out in the world whose outlook on the world hasn't changed since high school. So it's, I think, the duty of the university to create critical thinkers, philosophers, to open up people's minds. Because the problem that we're up against, personally, isn't just racism. It's a complex system of oppression to anyone who's in poverty, and racism is just one aspect of it. We have the environmental crisis. We have thousands of women going missing every day. We have thousands of children going missing into sex trafficking. We have countries overseas that are in pandemics and famines themselves. And I mean, everything we're up against as these intelligent leaders that we're supposed to be coming out of college, we're not even prepared to tackle it because our universities aren't preparing us to be the leaders that they want us to be. So it's up to students to be self-educators, read a book that's not a part of your syllabus, to keep creating conversations like this one with your peers, to hold each other accountable whenever you hear anyone being racist, sexist, homophobic, or just being ignorant. I think it's up to everyone to call out their teachers when they say something that isn't true. I told my teacher, he was a philosophy professor, that Jesus was Black, and he refuted it. He told me that it didn't matter what color Jesus was, but now you look at it, if the whole world thinks that Jesus was white, what does that say about Black people? That they're worthless. If everyone knew that Jesus was Black, and when they closed their eyes, they saw a Black man instead of a white man, maybe we wouldn't have so many racial problems right now, because your Lord and Savior was himself Black. And you have professors who are refuting this common sense narrative. I don't even know how to say it. I get so angry when I talk about it. But yeah, it's up to us to open our mouths in classes, to provide an outlook that is different from those of what your peers have been accustomed to. As Native people, to open your mouth. As Black people, to open your mouth and to just keep talking. So if anyone else has any, I know we've been on the duty question for a while, but if anyone else has anything they want to say about what universities need to do, you can say that. And I also think it's the duty of universities across the nation to acknowledge that they are on Native land. Native people don't get free education in this country. They should, but they don't. That's a false narrative. Some tribes, depending on what your tribal status is, they do, but for the most part, I think that's a false narrative. And universities need to do better with that as well. Anyone else want to take the mic? I'm done.
Rachel?
Yeah, two things on that. One is something nerdy that I've been doing lately is reading articles about what is the point of the university and what's our purpose. And it's interestingly enough, what you said, Slam, like that's how I see what the purpose of the university is. But there's a lot of debate on the sort of businessification, making university into more of a business, and which again superimposes or already reinforces that dominant social structure that's looking more for inputs and outputs than it is actual learning and transformation. It becomes more about the transaction than the transformation. So I just think that's something that's, as somebody who is part of higher education, something that I am aware of, and it's hard to challenge. It's hard to know where to challenge because it's everywhere, but it's something that I'm trying to raise my own awareness around, as far as what's the point of the institution, and then how does that impact the students that are graduating and perpetuating the world we live in, like you mentioned. The other thing that I have learned over the years is students' voices are powerful. Like they were powerful to change the actual systems that are at work within the university, and especially when students learn how to navigate and use those channels to make change. Like that's when your board of trustees and your higher level administrators start to listen, when there is a contingency of students. I could yell and scream all I want, but if a bunch of students say it, there's power there. And then the other thing that you said, Slam, maybe just to reinforce, is you never know who's sitting in your classes, that when you speak up and when you speak out, sometimes you might be affirming something they're too afraid to say or won't voice, or sometimes you might be helping somebody think differently that you never know. And I know it can be a risk. It can be a big risk to speak up and speak out. And that risk might come with some unseen power that you don't know about, but that can really be transformative or affirming and encouraging for somebody else. So I think students' voices are powerful.
And one last thing, if you don't believe that your university is a part of this system that is basically oppressing us, look up how your school is invested in the fossil fuel industry and their hand in this climate crisis that we're facing right now, for those that are watching.
And just to add to all of that, I think, it still goes back to what we've been teaching our kids from the beginning. And it's, not just in our schools, but in our whole country, right? It's the me first attitude. That in order for me to feel good about me, I had to have more money than you. That I had to have better cars than you. I had to have a better house than you. Then we had to pay for the education and take out student loans, which means in order for me to get this education, I'm gonna have to find a good job to pay it back. So I don't have time to sit here and talk to you about the dangers of fossil fuel. I don't have time to sit here and talk to you about niceties. It's always me first. And as long as we continue to put into the mindset of our people that the most important thing is money, that the most important thing is status, that the most important thing you can achieve with an education is a title, that they're going to be forever lost. And I do think it's up to students and professors to speak out about some of the stuff and push back on it. Now a lot of professors are afraid to say certain things in the classroom because students may start complaining about you being racist, right? Or about you being that. And I'm not one of them. I'm like you, Slam. If a professor tell me that Jesus was white, I'm just gonna have to straighten him out. I remember, my daughter, my youngest daughter, when she was in grade school, they asked her to do a paper on Abraham Lincoln. I said, you go research how Abraham Lincoln was a racist. And so she went back and got all of his speeches when he was running for president. And then her teacher told her that was wrong. And that teacher had to come talk to me. You know what I'm saying? She ain't like that. But what I'm saying though is, we got to push back. We got to push back when we see this stuff, man. But we're not going to be able to get students to, at this level. We have to do what we can, but it starts, with the way that our whole country is built on me first, right? I mean, I got students in law school, man. It's a lot. They all they want to do is go out there and just make money at the expense of other people. And as well as I do, when you working for some of these corporations that don't care about the environment, when you're working for some of these corporations that really don't care about people at all, healthcare, anything like that. Hey, so I think all of us have our part to do in it, and I appreciate you all doing this show. So the question is, what can I do from wherever I'm at? And I think that's what Rachel was getting to. I had to grow where I'm planted. What can I do from my position? I can't change the whole world myself, but I can do what I can do from right here. And if that's trying to educate other people on different avenues that they haven't seen before, then that's my part. If it's about pushing back at the university, because it's easy for us at the university to sit back and look out into the world and say, look at all that systemic racism. Oh my God, look at it. Man. Look at those people out there. And we're the damn cause of it. Right? I mean, how tone deaf can you be? You taught them, professor. The people you talking about is the people you educated. And now you're going to make it seem like it's their fault because they took what you taught them and put it to use? Man, come on.
So to write off of that, the last question I have for you guys, because both of you guys have been in educational environments in different places across like the continental US. What are some changes that you've seen during your professional life? And then I guess to kind of piggyback on that question is, what are some changes that you've seen in the past 2 months or so in light of this movement? And if you're able to compare the two, then I'd like to hear it. It's kind of like a multi-layered question, but.
Rachel?
I actually had time to think about this too, and it was harder for me. I think maybe it's maybe easiest for me to think about in the past 2 months is at least, and I can only speak for here at University of Tampa in the context that I'm in, is it seems like in the division of the university that I'm in, that this the conversation, and I'm not sure where the conversation is going, honestly, like, you know, how we were talking about earlier, like, is it going to be about like the band-aids and the symptoms, or is it going to be about the system? And I can't tell yet where that's going, but it's not going away from our radars yet, which to me is something different than I've seen before. And again, I've been in this, at least the university system, for 12 years. So and it's coming from like our directors and our VPSA. Like our VPSA is this is part of her work as a human being, but coming from different levels of having this conversation in our offices and specifically in career services, it's what are we doing to perpetuate this, and how are we representing, like, on a very simple level, we're a super white office. And so we talk about that and we're have conversations about that. So those kind of things, it's kind of not a very succinct answer, but that's what I've seen, is that the conversation's not going away. And how that conversation is going to continue to manifest itself, I'm not sure. So.
Yeah, I think, like I said, when being involved in civil rights since high school, and when I was an undergrad, I went to a school called Wittenberg University, which is in the Midwest, Springfield, Ohio, and it was Lutheran, and maybe 3,000 students, 100 of us was Black, but like Slam, I like raising hell, so I remember. I became the president of the Black Student Union. They said, well, you got a little bit of money to bring speakers. And I said, I want Louis Farrakhan here. And that, man, all hell broke loose up there. But anyway, but here's my point. So when I started practicing law and doing some of the cases, my very first case was very similar to George Floyd, where the officers got on this man's back, put his knees on him, and he died from positional asphyxiation. That was in 1994, actually 1995. And so I did a lot of cases like that. And we would protest and march. And, 2001, we had riots in the city of Cincinnati for 4 days, much like we saw in Ferguson and a few years ago. But it was always Blacks out there protesting, right? It wasn't a mix of people. It was us versus them, right? And I think, getting back to your question, what's been different about this time is that it has, I think it goes back to Trump's, I think it goes back to after Trump got elected too, and just the overt racism that we've seen come out, not just against Black people, against indigenous people, against brown people, against immigrants, against the environment. Everything that he's done, right, has just been based on greed. And I think a lot of that has contributed to the outcry that we've seen over the last 2 months, to why it wasn't just Black folks out in the streets protesting police brutality. It was white people, it was brown people, it was women, it was men, it was children, it was international. They had people in New Zealand, right, protesting, people in Iran protesting with George Floyd's picture. Can you imagine that? In London, right? In Asia. And so what is it about that? And why is this different? And really, when you go back to the 60s and you would hear Dr. King and others, people say, if not now, then when? If not now, when? That's really where we at right now. Because with the momentum that we have, because it has taken on a life of its own, right? And so we went from Black Lives Matter and police brutality to defund the police. Now we're talking about environmental. The Supreme Court, or not the Supreme Court, there was a judge who ruled to shut down the pipeline earlier today, right? Going back to fossil fuel and all that stuff. And so we just see at this point so many different people for so many different reasons. And I don't think we would have seen this had we not seen so much overt systemic racism over the last several years, where people are just like, you know what, this is not who we are, right? And so people are more open to learning. I mean, look at what's going on with I mean, you know how long it's been taken for the NFL to even consider changing the name of the Washington Redskins? What NASCAR is doing? I mean, really, right? And so again, there's something else going on here other than just police brutality. And it's really people saying, you know what, this is not how we want to live no more. So I think we need to take advantage of it while it's there. But I like what you guys are talking about. And I think, again, universities have to take a good look at themselves instead of talking about what's going on out there. Take this moment to say, what are we doing? How are we contributing to this? Because we play a big role in what's going on outside these doors.
Just to wrap it up, I appreciate that. You guys did awesome. You answered all the questions super insightfully. I just want everyone to remember that your greatest weapon is your mind. We can no longer use our hands to fight against the system. We can't fight the American army. We can't fight this country at all. It's our minds, and it's joining together and trying to get things legislated. It's trying to move society in a way that we will be one day more wise than foolish. For Black people and all people of color to remember that we come from the creators of civilization. We come from the richest people in the world, kings and queens, Aztecs, who built some of the most complex civilizations the world has ever seen. It wasn't in Europe. It was in Mexico, Africa. Sort of remember that. Think for yourself. Everything you hear and learn, refute it until you're able to do your own research. Remember, what you're putting in your mind is just as important as what you're putting in your body. And then whatever your conception of the divine is, to pray and stay connected to that. And if you aren't connected to anything beyond this world, meditate and come closer to yourself. And that's how we're going to create change, through education and love for knowledge. I don't know if Kavehi has anything else to say.
No, I think everyone has said everything that has needed to be said. Again, like this topic, this is only the beginning of the conversation, honestly. I hope in the future we're able to continue this conversation, because what you guys all have said before, and even Dr. Harris said, that we don't need policies, we don't need laws to start to reform our education system. It starts in the classroom through specific teachers and talking about the things that aren't being said. Mr. Lawson, like you said, teaching the truth. It starts from there, like starting it in the classroom, so that when people go out and into the professional realm, they're speaking the truth. They're not perpetuating things that they learned that were incorrect. But yeah, I think Slam wrapped that up beautifully. Like, you need to be conscious of what, like, your mind is in your body. So aside from just like eating healthy, you also need to be doing things to help your mind like flourish and grow and continue to learn and absorb. But yeah, I thought this was a great start of this conversation. And I hope to bring you guys back on to continue this conversation.
Well, I have fun.
I love all that.
Yeah,
Me too. This is awesome. You guys are doing an awesome thing.
Yeah. Thank you for doing it.
Okay, well, on that note, I'm going to end the live stream. So thank you all for watching, and we hope to see you on our next episode. Stay tuned. Check out our Instagram for information. And yeah.